Welcome to this episode of Acclime Conversations, where we talk to the business community and learn more about the stories behind the people. And today we are talking about the future of tourism in Vietnam. Today's guest is Ken Atkinson. Ken is the founder of Grant Thornton Vietnam, and he's been involved with many different business operations over the years, including charities, business groups, and his passion is tourism. Ken, his experience includes being part of the Vietnam Business Forum, representing the tourism industry, the Tourism Advisory Group, but he's been actually a long time doing projects in Vietnam directly. So Ken, welcome today.
Thank you very much, Matt.
I'd love to just start this conversation to sort of talk about your first tourism project in Vietnam back in 1989.
That's right.
Quite a while ago. Tell us about that story and how it brought you to Vietnam so many years ago.
Right. Well, I've been heavily involved in tourism projects in mainland China from '79. And one of my clients was an international hotel group called SAS, International Hotels. And I was doing work for them in China. And one day the person responsible for Asia Pacific said, I'd like you to go to Vietnam and do a feasibility study for us for a hotel development in Hanoi. So it came at a very kind of appropriate time. Tiananmen Square had just happened, and China was in some ways getting a little bit big for what was my own company, which was relatively small, and I was learning that in China you really needed personal relationships in almost every city you were trying to work in. So came to Vietnam and was actually kind of blown away by, I guess, the people, and also the charm of Hanoi in those days. Hanoi was just oozing that charm. It was quiet, it was peaceful, trees and lakes, and a bit reminiscent of Paris without the French people there. Kind of started thinking about the opportunities, and then you started to look at population and then the opportunities for tourism development, the coastline, etc., etc. So I decided to basically in that week I decided to refocus my business from mainland China to Vietnam, and I don't think I've ever really regretted that.
Here we are today. A little bit different to what it was back in 1989.
Sure. Actually, you don't see the burnt out tanks on the way in from the airport in Hanoi.
It wasn't that long after the sort of foreigners started rediscovering Vietnam. So it was the very early times of tourism. So now international tourism is obviously an important global part of the global economy. It's a significant part, and we saw this with COVID effectively stop. We saw international tourism cease. What's been your thoughts on the impact, and where does that left us globally with tourism? We'll come back to Vietnam a bit later, but sort of put this in perspective. Where are we with international tourism at the moment?
Right. Well, I guess the interesting point topically is US opening up to foreign inbound tourists as of today. But I think obviously we've seen significant drops in travel. I think the forecast for 2021 is that tourism revenues globally will be about 37% of what they were in 2019. So it's left a lot of businesses closed, obviously. Some will reopen, some maybe not. And it's hurt the livelihoods of lots of people. I mean, lots and lots of people. I think global tourism was pretty similar to Vietnam. It was about 10% of global GDP, so significant.
And for the Asian region, it was obviously probably a bigger percentage for a lot of countries. Where are we positioned in looking at the Asian side of things? Obviously, you say US has opened up, and some Europe's opened up for tourism, and even sort of parts of of Africa and the Middle East. Asia's just starting, but I think the impact's greater given the reliance in recent years in a number of countries that tourism want to bring.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you look, China had over 60 million inbound tourists in 2019. Thailand had just about 40 million. Vietnam, of course, was 18, but overall in Asia Pacific, the inbound market was about 275 million people. So significant, and all those economies. I mean, Thailand was really built on tourism. Indonesia, not quite to the same extent, but still very significant. Because of basically visas and other restrictions in Vietnam, that came a bit later for us. But it's still been a major contributor, and it's been growing, at 15 to 20% per annum for the last few years.
And we saw that in January 2020, before COVID hit. We were well above the peaks, weren't we, of what we were looking at?
So we had 1.9 million visitors in the month of January, which was, a record, and we were on course for a real boom year.
So where does that leave Vietnam now? We've got countries like Thailand's opening up now. Where does that leave Vietnam in the big picture?
I'm afraid that we're looking like we're getting a little bit left behind, particularly Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, or Bali in particular. These countries have been planning, they've been experimenting, but the efforts are being centrally led, and they're being centrally planned. Along with obviously with the local authorities like Phuket, but that's not really been happening to the same extent in Vietnam. I think those other countries have researched or modified their target markets. They know what visitors from those markets are going to be demanding in terms of changes, whether it be airports or whether it be interaction with hotel staff and checking in, all this kind of thing that people are more and more aware of today. And I think, unfortunately, we're a bit behind the curve, and they've been investing quite heavily in marketing, communications, and advertising on television in particular. But I'll talk a little bit more about Vietnam and its marketing a little bit later.
Okay, so we'll get back to that there. So Vietnam, we don't have international tourism. We don't yet have a roadmap, even though there's lots of announcements. Can we survive on domestic tourism alone?
No, I think we've seen over the last 18 months that we can't. The industry can't survive on domestic alone. Domestic accounts for about 1/3 of total tourism revenues. So although in absolute numbers, 2019 we had 80 million plus domestic travellers and 18 million international visitors. International accounted for 2/3 of the $36 billion in revenues. So, and we see it by, you just go into any of the 5-star hotels in Ho Chi Minh City, and they've been lucky if they're getting 10% occupancy, unless they've been running part of the quarantine program.
So what do we do? Where do we go from here? Sort of what recommendations do you suggest that we should be looking at to safely open up, but given the impact and the importance of tourism to Vietnam?
Well, I think it's an opportunity to rebalance, if you like. I think we were more numbers focused than we were quality focused before COVID, and I think this would be an opportunity to focus on the more quality, high spending inbound markets. And at the moment, anyway, China is, for example, they're not allowing people out of the country, so there'll be no inbound China for quite some time, I think.
And China represented what, about 1/3 of our tourists to Vietnam?
Yeah, about 30%. Yeah. So I think there is an opportunity, but it needs to be properly coordinated. We need to be really researching where we think are the best target markets for us. We need to have a coordinated marketing plan for those markets, and we need to understand what those customers will be demanding because they're different. You know, people are talking about the wedding market in Phuket and bringing in charters for Indian weddings, which would be a great source of revenue. But how much research has actually been done on what Indian visitors will actually be demanding? And it's very easy to to get a bad name amongst a particular group of visitors.
A pivot takes a lot of work to do that and a lot of effort to get there. So where is the marketing? Where is the focus at the moment within the Vietnamese industry?
Well, interesting. We were asking VNAT, who are really in charge of marketing at a central government level, about the marketing plan for 2022, and the message I got back was, well, they don't have one because they haven't been allocated a budget. Now, in most business organisations, you'd be doing the marketing plan and then asking for the money, but it seems to have hit a brick wall in VNAT. So that's a concern. Another concern is, there's all this chatter, and there are 5 or 6 different provinces that are saying we're going to have tourists back in November, but how much planning has actually gone into it? Phuket, yes, they've got the capability to have the whole island vaccinated, but they haven't thought about all the returning employees that the hotels are going to need, who are probably coming from areas where they've not been so lucky with the vaccination rollout. And how are you going to vaccinate all these people, and where are you going to put them? Well, they're basically in quarantine.
So does the Sandbox model, is that a practical stepping stone for Vietnam, or is that something that we've seen a la Phuket really hasn't been that exciting for inbound foreign guests?
I think Phuket got about 50,000 in the first 3 or 4 months of international visitors, or a lot of those visitors were actually Thais wanting to return home. And it basically was not successful because of the 7-day quarantine requirement. Surveys that we've seen and we've actually conducted through the Tourism Advisory Board show that if there's any quarantine requirement, or you're being forced into tour groups, then you're going to limit the number of people that find that attractive. And of course, that's the path Vietnam is going down. The announcement on the 5th, last Friday, was basically it's got to be an organised tour, and your movements are restricted for those first 7 days. So to me, there's going to be very, very limited uptake of those options.
Now, we've talked in the press, there's a lot of different cities and talking about their sandboxes. Have we seen anything from the government on coordination about how that would work, the visa process, how that actually works, or is this still hopeful discussions from various sectors that are trying to push their agenda to restart tourism?
Well, I think it's twofold there. So there's a lack of, as I say, of central coordination. Vaccination passports. Well, they talk about you need a vaccination certificate, which is issued by a competent authority. Well, what's a competent authority? The best solution is to have a vaccination passport, which like IATA pass or whatever. But there's been very little work gone into that. I hear feedback that some of the provinces that are talking about receiving are just basically towing the line. They don't want to appear to be being left behind, but they've got no intention at all of actually implementing, because they don't know how to implement safely. And as I say, no marketing. I just, it's not like people are just going to come rushing back, because there's that pent-up demand that we talked about maybe 12, 15 months ago. I think, the dynamics have changed a lot.
So where does that leave us then going forward? When do you think the borders will start opening for genuine tourism? And what sort of volumes are we expecting? When are we going to get back to normal, whatever normal is?
Yeah, well, the Euromonitor survey shows that, well, their forecast is 2024 to 2026, in the worst case, we will get back to pre-COVID numbers. I mean, that's generally globally, and Vietnam would not be any exception. Although we might be a little bit quicker if we get the other things right. So it's going to be a long haul back. I don't see that we're going to reopen without restrictions before Q3 next year, and I think that a lot of the bigger hoteliers, anyway, that I've spoken to, that's a consistent kind of view across the piece when they're doing their budgets for next year. So if we might get lucky with, as I say, niche markets like the Indian wedding market, but there's a lot more thought, a lot more planning, a lot more effort, and a lot more government coordination that really needs to go into it to be successful.
So does that mean that domestic tourism can protect the infrastructure in place, or do you think the infrastructure is already damaged, and how are we going to get back to that position? Because as you said earlier on, it has been devastating given the percentage of the economy and the people's and livelihoods. Is the infrastructure able to meet that demand, or are people just going to reinvest like as a priority area?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. So, I mean, what we've seen so far is that I think the Vietnamese have become very frightened of COVID, and that will impact people's travel habits. So I think it's one thing getting on your bike or getting into a car and going down to Vung Tau or Ho Cham or even Phan Chiet. It's another thing getting on a plane. And I think people are genuinely concerned about getting on planes. So that will, at least for quite a while to come, I think will impact people's travel habits. One concern that has been raised by a lot of hoteliers in particular is the fact that a lot of the employees from the sector have gone and found other jobs in sectors that they consider to be more or safer, more reliable, and they're not going to be furloughed immediately. There's another COVID outbreak. So I think there's also going to be issues around HR and quality HR. And I think, or I don't think, that there's been enough effort, particularly in that mid-segment of hotels, about how to use digitalisation to make places safer and more secure, but also to reduce the dependence on human resources.
So what would be your suggestion to both the sector and the government now to move forward? Where should the priorities be? You mentioned HR. What else are we doing as far as recommendations?
Well, as I say, the one of the primary recommendations we've been making through the Tourism Advisory Board is to have a multi-ministerial task force with members of the major stakeholders from the private sector to really oversee the formation of regulations and standards across the industry in Vietnam, from every touch point, from the point of picking up people and putting them onto a Vietnamese aircraft to getting them into the airports here, getting them to the hotels, and throughout the journey, and also making sure that we've got adequate medical facilities that will cope with any outbreak amongst these foreign groups, even from day one. If we're bringing in foreign tour groups and everybody's travelling in a group and there is an outbreak, then we're going to have, not quite a substantial number of people that are going to need to be quarantined, that are going to need to be looked after, and they're not going to want to go to government quarantine camps. They want to go to hospitals or decent hotel facilities.
So are you positive to where we're going to get in the tourism sector in Vietnam? You've been involved for many years, you've seen the ups and downs. Yeah. Are you still positive, or are you sort of negative right now towards where we stand? I
mean, if I take the medium-term view, of course I've got to be positive, because the natural attractions of Vietnam are not going to disappear. The heritage, the beaches, the nature tourism, and there's a lot of other sectors that are developing, like sports tourism or medical tourism. Golf tourism is a big one. They're not going to disappear, but we've got to get our systems and processes, and we've got to get our marketing right, and that's where I think we're going to be held back, and that's where I think some of our major competitors like Thailand and Indonesia are going to steal a march on us.
Well, Ken, thank you so much for this joining us today for Acclime Conversations.
You're welcome.
And always good to talk with you, and I look forward to catching up again and to see where the tourism industry gets to in Vietnam.
Okay, thanks a lot, Matt.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.